This is Kevin Harrington, original shark from Shark Tank, inventor of the infomercial, and you're listening to Jamy Bechler from Success is a Choice.
Providing insights to help you grow your business, improve yourself, and add value to those around you. You're listening to the Success is a Choice podcast, where you get a peek into the lives of industry leaders as they share their stories with you.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/Success is a Choice podcast. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Now, I'm excited to talk with today's guest. Rusty Kennedy is the athletic director at Midway University, which is located just outside of Lexington, Kentucky. For his efforts at Midway, he was named the 2017 River States Conference Athletic Director of the Year. Before leading the Midway Athletic Department, Rusty was a very successful college basketball coach for nearly 20 years. And now, let's go ahead and join our conversation with Rusty Kennedy. Well, Rusty, I appreciate you joining us today on the podcast. I look forward to talking with you for the next few minutes. Tell us about your experience there at Midway. You've had some interesting experiences there in just a short time as you transitioned Midway from an all-female school to a co-ed school. Talk about that a little bit, if you would.
Sure. It's something you essentially almost couldn't make up, some of the things that we've dealt with in my short time here. I arrived here at Midway University in Midway, Kentucky, January of 2016. And when I arrived, we had been a all-female school for 169 years. Our traditional campus population, when you take out adult ed and graduate studies, was somewhere in the 230 to 250 range of just females that were in the brick and mortar traditional campus. So really had gotten to a very small model that was not really sustainable. And when I arrived, there really was no talk of going co-ed because the board had shot it down. And though the administration was interested in pursuing that, it had not been something the board wanted to take on. So we prepared to do some things. We decided to bring back women's cross country. We decided to bring back women's tennis. We were going to bring back those in 16-17. Those would add to an existing portfolio of 8 sports we had when I got here, which it was women's basketball, women's golf, women's soccer, women's volleyball, women's softball, archery, equestrian western, and equestrian hunt seats. So those were the 8. And in those 8, we were down to less than 100 student athletes that spring of 2016. So we really were struggling. And I got here and we couldn't even hardly fill rosters. We had like 12 softball players and like they had barely gotten through the soccer season. So it was kind of an embarrassing situation. And that was part of the reason I was brought in, to try to clean up a lot of what was here. So I was here maybe, 3.5 months, and the first week of May, the board decided they did want to go co-ed. So we had decided to add those 2 women's sports, and that was going to leave us with 10, but the board said, hey, let's go co-ed. Let's add male sports in the fall of 2017. So it would give us a whole year to prepare and set up and do all this. And this happened probably somewhere around May 10th, May 15th, somewhere between that range, that the board meeting. About 10 days later, so about May 25th, I do remember this because I was heading towards the a conference AD's meeting. My president catches me and says, hey, St. Clarendon College in Kentucky, which is about 50 miles away, is in financial straits, and their president called and said, hey, we may close, and we just saw you went co-ed. What do you think about taking some of our male teams, hiring the coaches and actually taking a lot of the players that would transfer and just having a ready-made group now you still had to schedule them and uniform them now and outfit and do all that stuff. So I remember he asked me, he said, well, don't tell anybody, just think about it. And so I'm driving to the AD's meeting thinking, well, that's the craziest thing I think I've ever heard. That is, I don't know that we can do that. But then the other part of you says, schools are in trouble financially all the time. That's not uncommon at the small college level, as you well know, Jamy. And so I kind of put it out of my mind, thinking, well, that's not going to happen. Well, they closed on June 1st or 2nd, so not long, a week later, basically. And the day they closed, the president and I, they announced it at 10 in the morning. By 1 o'clock, the president and I were in the president's office in St. Catherine trying to hammer out an articulation agreement, meeting with coaches, and seeing about the next steps. And I have to back up. The day before, we had got approval from the board's executive committee to speed up our timeline of adding male sports by 1 year. So we had already done our legwork the day before that, knowing that this was probably impending. And over the next 3 to 5 days, we added and hired men's basketball, men's soccer, baseball. And golf wasn't on our plans, but my golf coach comes to me and said, hey, the St. Catherine golf coach called me and said, I have 8 or 9 male golfers looking for a place to go. Why don't y'all start men's golf? So we didn't plan to start men's golf. That kind of fell in our lap. And so we had our women's golf coach become our men's golf coach as well, and we added men's golf. So that was our 4th male sport, along with the 2 female sports we were adding. From the previous thing. So we added 6 sports in 1 year, and basically 4 male sports in June. So it took us 2 months. We didn't have a schedule. We didn't have a ball. We didn't have a history. We didn't have anything. And so it was a very eventful summer of 2016, to say the least. But we were able to pull it off, and when the dust settled, the fall of 2016, we had 14 sports and 260 athletes, which was up from the semester before where we had 8 sports and 92 student athletes. So a radical jump, to say the least.
Quite the merger and acquisition there.
Yeah, I often said I might have been the only AD in history to transplant 4 sports from a school to another school. And even if there was someone who'd done something like that, the piece of transplanting 4 sports from a school to a school who had never had a male student athlete might have separated me, even more. So it was a very eventful summer, and we had a lot of coaches pitched in and really did a great job of setting things up. And last year went really smoothly. Honestly, I could not have envisioned it going as well as it went. And it seemed to bring a new energy to campus. We went from an athletic department that was quite frankly scuttling and not very competitive to about 11 of our 14 sports were 500 or better. We had our best season in decades in several women's sports. Women's softball finished 2nd after winning 4 games the year before. Soccer had their first winning season in well over a decade. Women's soccer. Men's soccer came in and finished 10-8 in their inaugural season, and the 2 teams ahead of them ranked in the top 4 in the nation. So we might have won other conferences, even though we finished 3rd in our own. Baseball won the conference championship. Women's basketball in 15-16 went 0-30, and then last year they went 22-10 and won a share of the division championship. It was just a crazy thing. And then women's golf won their 2nd straight conference championship by 42 strokes, I think. So fantastic year, and we've joked that we're not sure we can duplicate that again. And then this year we've added 3 more sports. We added non-competitive cheer, men's tennis, and men's cross country to give us 17 sports, and we've just finished our census for the fall. We have 340 student athletes, so we're up another 30%. And essentially 3 semesters we went from 92 student athletes to 340. So it's been quite the growth, and as long-winded as I was in this little story, it's been probably a lot more complicated than I make it out to be as well.
Normally I would ask, what could you tell somebody that's going through the same situation, or give them a piece of advice, but I'm pretty sure most people don't do any of it. But I guess that there's probably not going to be a lot of people that are going through the same exact situation as you. But I'm sure that you've had some challenges in either taking programs, absorbing complete programs, but more importantly, maybe opening it up to, you opened it up to male students.
Yes.
Essentially doing something that's never been done before. Did you face many challenges during that process, or was it pretty smooth in terms of the mentality and the mindset of other people around you?
It was actually, all in all, very smooth. The only resistance we had was, and you referred to mentality, the resistance was culturally on both ends, because we took over 100 student athletes from St. Catherine. So you had a mass that came with a whole different culture. And on the other end of the spectrum, you had a women's college that started letting in men. And last year we only had about 25% males on our traditional campus. We were still 3-to-1 ratio female to male. And I remember telling the faculty, and that the faculty in service the first week, I went in and spoke to them about it, and I said, now listen, let's relax just a second. We're still 75% female. This is not like the Mongol hordes have invaded and are surrounding the campus here. This is, it's not going to radically change things. It's just there's just going to be a few males in your class. And really, we had a bunch of good guys. And I think another secret to why it was so smooth was when we did this, we also, in conjunction, we used to make every athlete live on campus if they were on athletic scholarship, and we actually relaxed that and said we want juniors and seniors to live off. And so a lot of upperclassmen transfers lived off campus. So you didn't have some of the issues. You had predominantly freshmen and sophomores on campus, and our upperclassmen, if they, as so many small private ed institutions, some of the things that they do on campus as a 21-year-old cause problems, but that maybe they should be able to do on their own and in their apartment. And so we were able to kind of set that situation up. And so if Johnny wanted to, crack a beer, he wasn't going to get written up and fined because he was in his own apartment. Mm-hmm. So that helped with a lot of that. And the cultural piece with the St. Catherine kids, it was just a sense that they had to adjust from a Catholic higher ed institution with certain values and certain structure to a Disciples of Christ institution that was probably a little more liberal and a little more accepting of things. And so they adjusted to that. And for our coaches, the adjustment was going from no structure at St. Catherine, which they spent money like drunken sailors, to a place where we had some accountability and asked them to do certain things. And one of those things was you stay under budget here. You don't overspend. A lot of them were like, we didn't have a budget. We just spent, and they said yes or no. And I said, well, that's not how it works here. This is what you have. You better figure out how to make it work. And luckily they all did. Spoken like a true athletic director of the year, which you happened to win this past year. Congratulations on that. Well, I think they all, I appreciate it. They all felt sorry for me after that, after everything we did. I think they decided that they felt sorry for everything I went through, and they would reward me with that. Well, they probably figured, we don't know if he's the best AD, but he just did something that no one else has ever done. So that's got to account for something. The guy who basically was the runner-up for the award, he was joking with me at an AD's meeting recently, and he said, "You added 6 sports in a year. That's crazy." And I'm thinking, yeah, that would be crazy. But then basically we had 4 of those in a month and a half. So,
yeah, I'm not sure you can top that though.
No.
Yeah, I don't know if you're going to win that award again. Everything now is easy.
Probably not. They probably. Well, yeah, it's all a letdown now. I can't ever do better than that.
Yeah, it's easy. What do you mean you're busy? No, last year you were busy. This year, I mean, how can you be busy this year?
Well, is what 30% more athletes do to your infrastructure, especially when your infrastructure was built to handle less than 100 student athletes. So it keeps me running around. I think last year maybe it happened so fast that we got everything done. This year it seems we're chasing our tail a little bit, but
well, in business
we'll get there.
They always talk about scaling up and expansion. That you definitely expanded and scaled up pretty quickly.
And we're not done yet. So,
well, you used to teach business, right?
I did. I did. Taught business for 10 years, and that was the second part of my job when I was coaching basketball.
I understand that you have a little story that I think is pretty interesting. You bought a house on a credit card. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, that's kind of correct. I was out in Clarendon, Texas, and obviously little town in the Texas Panhandle, and you could get real estate fairly cheap out there. I mean, it wasn't exactly it was more of a buyer's market, we'll say that. And so I was in a rent house, actually a rent house of our vice president for finance, and she calls me in and says, "Hey, would you like to buy your house?" And I said, "Well, yeah, sure. How much you want to sell it for?" And so she throws out, she says $28,000. I said, "Okay, well, yeah, sure. I'd buy it for $28,000. That seems like a reasonable amount to pay for a 2-bedroom house." And so I started going to the bank. We had a board chair, or not board chair, but one of the board members on the bank. And so I go down there and talk, and they want to charge you, this and this closing cost and this much and this blah, blah, blah. And I thought, well, I'm not paying that. That seems like a lot to pay for very little money. And then it just struck me. I said, why don't I just take this credit card, and they'll give me 0% for 2 years on a cash advance, and all I have to pay is I think it was a 4% fee on the money up front. So I wound up basically just getting $30,000 cash advance deposited in my checking account off my credit card, and paid for the house and paid the title company to close and do some other things, and saved myself a lot of expense, and so it seems kind of non-conventional. People thought that was kind of odd, but I had paid the house off within 2 years after that, so I didn't really pay any interest on the money I borrowed to buy the house. So in essence, yes, I did use a credit card to buy a house.
and that I'm not sure I ever had a business teacher that maybe would be that interesting. That kind of philosophy.
They would have said no.
Business class is pretty good.
Yeah. Well, they always said I made it relatable.
That is good. That is good. I love that. I love that story.
That, and I used the stair-step teaching method. I figured out what I was going to teach on the stair steps up to class. So,
yeah. I once taught a badminton class when I was a grad assistant at Kent State, and I literally stayed a chapter ahead of my students. I had no idea what badminton was or how to teach it. Yeah, stayed one chapter ahead. Almost the stair-step approach, like you said. We watched a lot of Chinese Olympic badminton in class. I figured I couldn't teach as much as, let's watch some YouTube videos.
Yeah, badminton would be tough. That reminds me of one year when I was young and dumb, I had to take over a volleyball team one year. Well, I had zero volleyball background. So that was an entertaining coaching volleyball.
Bump set spike.
Well, I think they say pass set spike now. So
does that see?
Yeah. Bump has been outlawed. They don't say bump anymore.
Okay. Well, that certainly is a challenge. What's been another challenge or other challenges you faced that you've kind of overcome, or some big-time challenges during your career?
Well, I think as you well know, Jamie, I'm a guy who thrives on challenges. I enjoy challenges. In fact, when we started to have a little success, I usually started looking for another job. I seem to be drawn to reclamation projects. I took over the Western New Mexico basketball program, which had won one game in 2 previous seasons and was mired in a 35-game losing streak. And I took that job in August and inherited a group of young ladies who many of whom had never won a game in a Western New Mexico university uniform, and in fact, in their almost 2 decades as a Division II to that point, had not had a winning season, and so that was a heck of a challenge. We were able to turn that program around. It took me a little bit, and probably the most rewarding stop of my career. It's the worst stop of my career via wins and losses, but the most rewarding and the best coaching job I ever did was out there, taking that program from 35-game losing streak to, in my 3rd year, we finished over 500 and made the conference tournament for the first time in the Division II era out there. So
that's an interesting. You said something there that's an interesting thought. You said that it was your worst win-loss record, worst coaching stop from a win-loss perspective, but probably your best coaching job ever. Can you expand upon that? Because most people would probably think that if you lost or if you didn't have a good win-loss record, you weren't a very good coach.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I think most of us coaches figure that out at some point along the way, that it's not fair to judge everybody by their win-loss record, because the reality is, and I think the mark of how good a coach you are is how much do you get out of the hand you're dealt. How much, are you maximizing the talent you're given? And so, at Western, I had to stretch myself. I had to become a very defensive-minded coach, which was, not something. I was very offensive-minded for the majority of my career, and so much so that my 3rd year, the year we wound up going, over 500 out there, we were in the top 25 in Division II and team defense in several categories. We were in the top 5 and a couple more in team defense, and we basically, played nothing but half-court man-to-man and just made it trench warfare and guarded the heck out of you. So, which was definitely different than anything I'd done up to that point. But yeah, we were in a very severe scholarship limitation. We were also stuck in a situation where we had the worst travel arrangement of arguably any school in the country, because our average road trip was over 600 miles one way, and we drove everything. And
when you say we, you mean you?
Me. I drove. Yes, I drove. There were many, many nights where we got done playing in Colorado somewhere, and after a back-to-back, a Friday, Saturday, and that Saturday night, the girls went to sleep, and I drove the bus home, and we got in at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in the morning after driving all night. So that probably is the reason why I'm sitting here as an athletic director now and not coaching anymore. And it kind of burned me out a little bit, to be honest with you. But loved Western New Mexico, loved the players that played for me, loved the university. It was simply just burnout from coaching basketball.
We'll return to the interview with Rusty Kennedy shortly, but I wanted to take a moment to let you know about something that goes hand in hand with what he is trying to do at Midway University in developing his student athletes and giving them the best possible experience. We have written a book entitled The Leadership Playbook, Become Your Team's Most Valuable Leader. It is packed full of insightful stories and practical tips to help student athletes become better leaders and teammates. When we help develop students, we are also helping to influence the future in a positive way. Please visit theleadershipplaybook.com to learn more. And now back to our interview with Rusty Kennedy. Well, you're obviously proud of what you were able to accomplish there, even though it wasn't the greatest basketball situation. Would that be your most proud moment? Maybe what are some other moments that stand out to you that take some pride in your accomplishments?
Well, getting Our Lady of the Lake to the national tournament, and only their third year of having basketball. I came in, they had it 1 year, and they had parted ways with the coach that was there for the very first coach they had for one season, and the program was in a bit of disarray, and so I took the job and was able to kind of right the ship, and we went 29 that second season of existence, and then the 26 and 8 that third season, and made a run and won the conference championship, and got to the national tournament, and that was a fun experience, especially now. I left to go to Western New Mexico after that. My assistant took over, and he has had them consistently in the top 15 in the nation, and I think they're averaging about 27, 28 wins a year since that point. So he's done a fantastic job of keeping the program at a high level, and that's a sense of pride to watch what that program continues to do. I took Bacone College from a junior college to an NAIA 4-year program. I was the coach that led them through that transition, and that was fun. And only our second season of 4-year basketball, we went 24-10 there. So those are some things that stand out as proud moments in my career. But I think the most important thing from a coaching standpoint that I look back and the most proud of is how many players that I coached that are coaches now, and how many players I coach now that are productive citizens, from police officers to people that work in politics. Just a fantastic group of young women and men over 2 decades that have turned out to be outstanding citizens, and I think they're probably, if I have a legacy, they're probably my legacy. And what I always like to say about that is, when you get to heaven, they don't ask you how many games you won; they ask you how many lives you affected. And I hope, in an unconventional way, I hope I've affected a number of young people's lives for the good.
That's awesome. Leaders growing leaders. So you've grown other leaders that have gone out and had an impact on others. That's awesome. Let's end with some rapid-fire questions, Rusty. I'll ask you a few questions, and
Sure,
you just give
sure.
me some quick answers if you can, and we'll just go from there. Are there any podcasts or books that you're currently reading or consuming that you would recommend?
Well, I wish I could give you some great answer about reading some leadership book, but unfortunately, when I'm not at work and I'm reading and I'm relaxing, I'm usually reading some alternate history or science fiction type book, which a lot of people find fascinating. That I would be an alternate history or science fiction guy. So,
well, it makes you think, though.
That's
those are things. What's the author that you really like?
Harry Turtledove.
Okay.
Is the author's name, and he wrote the one most people know he wrote was Guns of the South, which was imagining if. Long story short, that he wrote this 20 years ago, whatever, maybe longer than that, where apartheid members in South Africa figured out a way to travel back in time and give the Confederacy AK-47s. and what happened after that, which I know sounds kind of funny to laugh about, but it's an interesting premise. And then he wrote I just finished a huge series of his that was about 7, 8 books, which said, in the middle of 1941, as the world rages through a war, aliens basically show up to conquer Earth, and it sounds kind of hokey, but he goes in depth of how everyone stops fighting each other and bands to fight the aliens, and then he examines essentially over the next 200 years through the series, how the two cultures interact, what happens, things like that, and it's a pretty interesting read. In fact, I'm in one now. I just started where he imagines that Reinhard Heydrich doesn't get killed in Prague in World War II, and he's essentially leading a guerrilla resistance against the Allies after the end of World War II. And so it's definitely some interesting things, and probably complete 180 from what I do for a living. So maybe that's why I'm interested in reading those type of things.
Well, first of all, it's good to relax and get away sometimes. And second of all, those bring up interesting questions, though, for leaders and different things, what would happen, what could happen. So that's interesting. If you had to recommend somebody, who should I get on a future podcast episode?
That's a great question. There's a lot of good people, and there's a number of outstanding athletic directors in my own league who I think would be interested, who I'm interested to know more about, even though I know these guys, and they I guess having an appreciation for their job and what they do makes me want to know more about how they got to there, things like that. Jeff Lanham at Rio at Rio Grande in Ohio does a fantastic job and is an outstanding program there. Joe Glover, who is the AD at IU Southeast, is our interim conference commissioner currently. He's a fantastic and fascinating guy himself. So some of those guys at our level interest me. Jim Abbott, obviously at Oklahoma City, is done a fantastic job there. They essentially compete for national titles in seems like every sport, so Jim would be one who would be, I think, a fascinating interview as well.
Speaking of fascinating people, who would you like to meet or spend time with that you don't currently know?
Yeah, I don't know. I've never been very good at those questions. You get people ask you, if you could have dinner with 3 people, living or dead, who would you, and you're just like, well, okay. I'm probably the least impressed person by famous people, and so I literally have run into celebrities and I just ignore them, because I always think of, if I was famous, I'd want someone to ignore me. I would want people to make a fuss over it. In fact, one celebrity, I'm next to him in the airport security line, and I just said, "Hey, don't want to bother you." I said, I'm a fan. I appreciate your work. That's all I said. And the guy then started going in with why you in town, and started kind of asking questions, and come to find out his daughter was a basketball player in AAU, and I was coaching basketball at the time, and it turned into a nice conversation. But I simply just wanted to say, hey, I know who you are, and I appreciate everything you do. So I don't know. I probably don't. That's a terrible answer to your question, but I don't really have anyone that jumps out and goes, man, I'd like to know that person.
That's all right. Those are sometimes tough, especially the 3 people to eat dinner with.
Yeah,
maybe a good cook.
Everyone wants you to say Gandhi and Jesus Christ, and you're just like, okay, that's probably not who I would want to have dinner with. So Gandhi didn't eat; he was always, fasting.
He would make for an interesting dinner guest, though. You'd be waiting to see if he's going to eat or something.
Yeah.
Do you have a reality show that you would be good at, that you would like to be on?
Man versus food.
Man versus food. Do you have an episode that you've really enjoyed of Man versus Food, or a place you've eaten at some places, Man versus Food?
I've eaten at several of those. Yeah, those are fun. Man versus Food, and then I've eaten at several of the diners, drive-ins, and dives. And in fact, we have one here in Midway that Fieri visited, and diners, drive-ins, and dives. That's a pretty good place. So,
well, if you other than your current job now, if you could do anything, what would you want to do? Be on Man versus Food. Be the host.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic to go around and do that. I would love to be a Major League Baseball GM or a NBA salary cap expert, or those fascinate me. In fact, when I was coaching, and especially near the end of my career, I treated my scholarships like a salary cap. Very much. And in fact, I had at Western, I had this little thing where I would basically, if I was trying to work within a structure of what we had, some kids would be on X amount of money, and I would say, listen, I know you're supposed to get this much money, but you're going to run out of eligibility at the end of this year, and I tell you what, if you will take a little bit of a cut this year, I will give you more next year. And so I was always pushing liabilities forward into the future, in restructuring scholarships, especially if kids who had more academic time than eligibility. And so I was always working those angles, and that intrigues me.
So you would be more of a money ball than the tradition, or would you have both? He'd be. I'm
still too old school, and I still like to shoot from the hip, and I still, I still operate by feel, and so I think I wouldn't be a true money ball guy. But I do appreciate, being in the money ball philosophy and those type things. I think that's a fantastic way of doing things. I just don't think I'm probably the pure analytics guy that would be that. But I think it's fascinating.
So you are a baseball fan,
yeah.
And you would like to be a GM. What is your take on when teams kind of have a fire sale, or it seems like lots of teams are either all in or they're all out? There's not a lot of smooth transition. And I think of, the Tigers, or I think of, other teams that have just kind of cut all their payroll or traded different people, and I know this year the Tigers traded Verlander,
yeah.
Others. What would your take be as a GM? How would you kind of rebuild a team?
Well, as a Tiger fan, I'm acutely aware of that situation. I think they needed to do that, and I think, unfortunately, if you're not in Chicago, Los Angeles, or New York, then you're not in a major market. So you're talking about what, 6-8 by Boston, 6-8 teams that are really what we would call large market teams. And the Tigers have spent like a large market team, but the reality is they should probably operate like a small market or medium-sized market team. And I think they've done the right thing. I think that the reality is the way salaries have gotten out of hand, you need to heavily invest and become really good at the scouting and development phase and gathering assets. And I don't care what sport, especially NBA and Major League Baseball, draft picks, assets, those are the currency that can help you improve your franchise and improve your roster. I mean, much like what Boston's done, what Danny Ainge has done since he's been there on the basketball side, gathering up draft picks and assets to make moves when you need to make them. And the Tigers are doing the right thing. And I think a lot of teams, if you're not a large market team, then you have to be able to unsentimentally pull the trigger and dump your high salaried veterans and turn them, at the peak of their value for, kids that can come in and be assets in your farm system that can eventually develop. So, and I think Belichick is, and that might be an answer to your previous question. I'd be fascinated to pick Belichick's brain. I'm a football fan, but not a huge football fan, but I'm like a lot of other people. I enjoy it, but the sense that he's come in and operated that franchise with such savvy and such cold calculus, as far as this guy, he may have a little more productive time, but he's past his peak, and being able to unsentimentally dump those guys or sign guys for short-term contracts, or ruthlessly swap picks and swap players, and he's just masterful at that. And I'm always intrigued by the things he does. Of course now I got all sorts of names. Nick Saban's another one. The way he does things, I find fascinating, and from an ex-coach standpoint, I just don't think it gets much better than Saban.
Great points. Well, Rusty, I appreciate your time today. Thank you for coming on the podcast with us. Where can people reach you or connect with you or find out more about you? If they
Sure. They can check us out at gomidwayeagles.com is our athletic webpage, and my contact information is on the staff directory there. My direct office line and email both there, and any way I can be of assistance, or someone happens to hear this and going through similar challenges, or even maybe just looking to start up a sport. I've started 9 in a little over a year, so I've gotten a little practice at it. So I'd be glad to share any information we have.
Great. I appreciate it. And we will make sure to put those in the show notes as well, so you can find those easily in the show notes. Rusty, once again, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. And
all right, thanks, Jamy.
Rusty Kennedy was definitely one of the best coaches I've ever coached against and had the privilege of watching from afar. He was able to motivate players and had a good mind for X's and O's. And now that he's transitioned into full-time administration, I have no doubt that he will be just as successful. And after listening to this interview today, I think it's clear that he's well on his way to being a top-notch athletic director. I appreciate you tuning in today, and don't forget to get yourself a free audiobook and a 30-day trial from Audible by going to www.audibletrial.com/Success is a Choice podcast. Thanks so much, and until next time, remember that success is a choice. What choice will you make today?